Smartrise is brought to you by
MTN.
Just 4 minutes that have parted away from the 8 a.m. hour. We thank you, those that are just joining us, and those that have been journeying with us here in Smartrise. Great and many thanks to you. And this is, of course, a time where we engage into the discussion of the day, try to take care of your business intellect, and of course, look at how we are developing as a country in terms of development. Now, we cannot talk about the general economy and, of course, how we are doing in terms of financing the different projects of the country and don't talk about the debt. Yes, and speaking about that, according to the Ministry of Finance, we are, operating around 48.91 trillion in debt. Yes, that is how much we owe to the different people where we borrow from. But in a different point of view, the Uganda Debt Network actually has come up with quite tremendous recommendations to government. And among these is the debt cancellation. Is that even an option, and what entails in that? Do we just plead and they forgive us of all these debts, or we actually have to go through a process? And of course, has this happened before? Did it bear fruit so that it is quite a good recommendation at this point in time? Now, to discuss that with me is Penny Nambabazi from Uganda Debt Network to weigh in on this and, of course, throw more light on what debt cancellation should be, and is it even an option? Yes. Penny, good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, let's get straight into it by, of course, you throwing more light on what debt cancellation is and what entails into all that.
Okay. Debt cancellation is mainly for countries, especially given the background that Uganda has already had with the campaign that we had in 1995-96 on the highly indebted poor countries seeking for debt relief, and it was given to them. Uganda was one of the first countries to receive this debt relief at that time, and the main objective was that with the debt that we had already incurred, we were going to channel the money straight into service sectors, social service sectors. So for example, education, health, that was where the agreement was, that once we cancel the debt from having loans from different, like the World Bank, IMF, a number of countries had gained a lot of debt over time. So that was the main objective, for that debt to instead be changed to, instead of paying it directly to them, it was going to go into service delivery. Yeah, so currently we are back again with seeking for debt cancellation, mainly because of the current situation. Even with what we already had as a country, Uganda, we were already highly indebted, but we had a bit of sustainability to say that maybe it is not that much. Given the current situation with COVID, it escalated a lot of loans coming in and made the government have to borrow to boost a lot of the healthcare system at ground, and also a different number of challenges that came with COVID. So basically, this cancellation now is to say to World Bank and IMF, as well as the G20, which is the world's richest countries, for them to pardon countries that are low-income countries that are highly indebted at the moment, to forgive their loans as well at this time, and to see that we can be able to find a way to structure it or to change it to meet the needs of social service sectors as well.
Right, so that instead of accumulating a lot of money, a lot of interest, servicing the debts, we can concentrate on the problems that are at hand, social services and all. But what does this mean? Doesn't it mean that Uganda has failed? Because if the G20 or the IMF or World Bank lent us money, let's say for the education sector, and we spent this money, of course, in different ways. We've always talked about misappropriation or even priorities and all that, but that is a talk for another day. But we already spent this money. And it is our obligation, or it was our obligation, to pay them. But of course, we realize that our hands are tied and we are crippled. Now, if this is considered, isn't that a total stamp that Uganda has failed?
In our view as Uganda Debt Network, given that we mainly are seeking for prudent resource utilization, government has yes been able to have a lot of allocations going into sectors such as works and transport, vis-a-vis education or health, at the time back then before COVID had come. And really, yes, there's a bit of a setback to say that as a country we could do better. We could look at proper utilization of the resources that we have domestically before we go to borrow. And we have always stood by our discussion that borrowing is not bad, but what we utilize the money for. Yeah. Are we prudently utilizing it for what we need and not priorities that are not out of the scope, priorities that are more to do with people centered and also having especially the service delivery angle met. Yeah, so basically it would be, of course, not really a stamp, but we hope that with this we can look back and also come back to the table and say, where do we again get to focus on as a country, not to come back to the same issue of cancelling debt again. Okay. So in the event that if it does happen and we get debt cancellation, as a country as Uganda, we have to do so much better than what we're doing right now. We have to look at cutting down on wasteful expenditure, and also trying to prioritize the needs of the people.
Okay. Take us through the different channels or systems that we need to go through to achieve this. Now that you make a recommendation, what goes on from that? Do you take it forth to government, and what is done thereafter? Okay.
Currently, given the World Bank and IMF and the G20, with the discussion they had in April, they were looking at only suspension of the debt, of the loans that had poor countries had incurred. But what we are saying as UDEN is that it should be total debt cancellation, because the suspension which they're trying to initiate will only cover to about 6 months. And after that, we have to now come back to paying the debt. So for a country like Uganda, will we still be really ready after 6 months to be able to say we can now start paying? Yet we already have a lot of shortfalls already in domestic revenue, a lot of shortfalls now with tourism cut off. So what it exactly would entail is that as a country we get to campaign for total debt cancellation and not suspension, and to also look at it as a way for being able to table it also in front of government. But Ministry of Finance is already also aware about this campaign, and they are also trying as hard as possible to get behind to see that they're able to have a way to discuss with IMF and World Bank and G20. So at the moment it is more of popularizing the campaign. We don't want to take it for granted that just because we got debt relief at that time, it is obvious that we shall get it. In fact, it will be more challenging now to make sure that as a country, if we do achieve it, we do have a lot of stakes to rise up to, not only as a government, but also in what we put into the country now, our resources. Where exactly are we going to go to? So it's mainly for Ministry of Finance, Parliament also coming through, practically channeling it through our oversight institutions, even the multilateral financial institutions, which I've said again are IMF and World Bank, to be able to emphasize that we need this debt cancellation.
All right, let's talk about the 10-year action of non-interests on the new debts.
Yes.
How can that be a recommendation as well?
Yes, as Uganda Debt Network, between the two main goals that we actually want to have this debt cancellation initiative campaign going, is that one was total debt cancellation, two was for 10 years of interest on any of those loans to be cut off. Given that we already as a country, our debt servicing is really taking a big share of the national budget. Already we're up to about 12 trillion right now in 2020. Okay. And we can't imagine what it will be next year. So for it to be a priority when it comes to interest payments to be cut off will enable us to now again focus now on the key areas, key service sectors especially, will not be having to say that out of domestic revenue, a huge chunk is going to interest payments. We shall be entirely mobilizing that revenue for our service sectors. So you'll find that at least sectors such as education and health, even challenges of failing to have district hospitals will be now answerable. In the case of what we have been going through with COVID, our health systems have really faced a big shock. So here we shall be saying no, with the revenue now that we have, we're no longer looking at interest payment. Okay. We're looking at countries now focusing, especially like Uganda, mainly being our focus is that we should be able to now channel it properly to social service sectors, and also trying to ensure that the marginalized and vulnerable people are also being part of the process, not merely just left on the side. Now we will have beneficiaries being answered to how the wealth, that money is being spent and utilized.
All right. Don't you think that we could also have another option being, collecting or mobilizing enough revenue locally so that we can know that this is as much as we can collect, so this is as much as we can spend, but entirely and sustainably looking at local domestic mobilization? Is that an option?
It is an option. In fact, we believe that because interest payments alone has been taking a huge share already, and it has put a lot of stress on the budget itself, because you cannot spend money. You can't go out to spend money on a sector or on a road when you know you have to pay back to a creditor. So it has put a lot of pressure on government, and with this, once domestic revenue is a priority, we will not be having shortfalls. URA will not be failing to actually have to be able to collect the revenue that it's targeting over financial year. So it is true that with mobilizing of this domestic revenue, we shall be able to improve a number of areas and challenges that we have been facing already, but more emphasis put on prudent utilization of these resources, also to where they are channeled to.
All right. Isn't transparency another question in bracket? Because if a government was as open at how much we have borrowed from whom and what it has been used for, don't you think that would actually make things a little bit easier even in servicing these debts? Yes, and
previously, before, we have echoed that the public debt already is elusive. We do not have actual, figures to say that this is what our public debt is right now.
And even
currently.
They have to tell us. They tell us what they can't tell us.
Yes,
you can't trust it.
And you find a number of controversial, statements from Bank of Uganda, Ministry of Finance. So we are having to also look at different reports, from IMF, from World Bank, that also, tend to show different figures as well. So it is definitely going to have to be for emphasis that already as a country we need to be able to be transparent on how much we owe to different lenders, different creditors, not even only for the ones that we know like World Bank and IMF, but even China. The private creditors are not always that transparent, and we need to come out to emphasize there is need for that transparency and accountability. Not only the transparency bit, but the accountability itself. How well are you able to emphasize as a country that while you are able to get as much money from a donor, you are able to spend it and also account transparently, but also for the people who are actually going to benefit from this project. So it's mainly a big emphasis that while we have our public debt already rising, we don't want to go on a number of different websites or information. We want to get it straight from government to let us know that, as of now, we do have a lot of debt incurred and how much it is and to what tune. Because we may quote different figures and they may also have their own figures, but currently we know that it is already at 48 trillion at the moment, and we are going according to Ministry of Finance, but we know that they should put a real emphasis on which figures to go by, and to transparently also show it out to the country to how much we are actually borrowing.
Let's look at the general big problem as to why Uganda is this heavily indebted. You understand? And we always look at such options to bail us out. Because you want to think it's not only Uganda that borrows. And like you keep saying, borrowing is not bad, but that means there are certain things that we are doing wrongly. So let's have the general talk. You understand? Let's have the general perspective on why Uganda reaches a position where it's seemingly looking as if we have failed to meet our responsibility. What is the biggest problem there? Do we spend carelessly? Do we borrow this money and use it, but then we are just quite unfortunate? What is the big question, or what is the big elephant in this bracket?
The big elephant is mainly that as a country, we do have an appetite to borrow. We have been borrowing really for a number of different areas, different projects that have also faced a lot of challenges when it comes to public investment. You know, what entirely it means to really say we are doing projects that are going to not only meet, just because we are trying to put an express highway, are we going to meet the beneficiaries to know that this is what they need, this is what is important, instead of having the same challenge in a district where they may be failing to get proper health care. So you find it's probably more, especially on the priority set as a country. What do we want to prioritize every time whenever we're going to get a loan from China or a loan from the World Bank? Where exactly are we going to be able to say, yes, we have prioritized the needs of the people and not that of the country? Because it comes off like we're prioritizing, you know, other needs of government and not for the people. Even while they may have good intentions, we still seem to see a lot of wasteful expenditure. You find that a number of different sectors being prioritized, which is not bad, but you find also even in the ministries themselves, we have had challenges with those travels, challenges with a lot of, you know, meetings being done, you know, with a lot of wastage of resources that could be really brought down, which they have done because of the current situation of COVID. But initially, that was one of the challenges. So again, also on the bit of failing to be also being able to account and be transparent when we go out to look for supplementary budgets from Parliament. Are they able to also come down and say, you know, you've got a lot of budgets over time, supplementary budgets. How then do you stop them? Can you focus on the Public Finance Management Act instead of actually looking at just you know, getting budgets over and over, supplementary budgets? So we have not really focused on a lot of these governing, at least frameworks, even to say that we are going by this, you know, not creating a lot of supplementaries for nothing, but also being guided upon with the Public Finance Management Act. So there are a lot of challenges that we see, but mainly because of those main core issues. Priorities being a bit of different from that of the people with what government wants, and also focusing on also these frameworks that are supposed to help us and guide us not to have wasteful expenditure and not to be able to not account and be transparent with what we spend on that kind of money.
All right. I also want to ask from you, of course, if this debt cancellation is actually considered, and all the recommendations right in it, isn't this tainting a name to Uganda? How will we walk into those offices again and asking for more money? That's, you know, going forward when we can't, of course, sustain some projects. Aren't we creating a threat, you know, of lack of trust if we need to borrow money from either World Bank or the G20?
Of course, we believe it will come with a lot of question marks. What happens afterwards with these creditors, because they have been able to give us a lot of loans, you know, that we have found ways of some utilizing, some are non-performing, you know, but to a point of where we can be able to get this debt cancellation. It is our plea and our what we're advocating for mainly is that if we say debt cancellation is given to us this time round, what else? What can we do better that we didn't do the last time? And we should not actually accept to go through with having to pass through debt cancellation and then go back to how we have been spending and how we have been, you know, doing the usual and not anything different. We have to come back to the table, sit with the government and also other institutions, with the World Bank and IMF. And yes, they may put a lot of strict positions in place to how well now we can spend their money, but it would be rather to spend it efficiently and transparently rather than not even get it, because at the moment we do need this debt cancellation. It is really a priority at the moment. Given the situation already at hand, we will not be able to revive as an economy. As long as our economy is still going to be affected at the moment right now, it will be harder for us to, you know, get back to even where we were before COVID happened. So yes, it will have a problem with the image that we have already put across as a country, but we do know that once we go forward with it and get that cancellation, we should be able to sit back on the table and see how well now can we be able to prioritize or even emphasize to IMF and World Bank that we are actually going to now focus on utilization also, and proper and no spending on things that are not essential
and non-priorities.
And non-priorities.
Let's get your last recommendations on this particular position that you are forwarding to government and the whole general outlook of handling the public debt.
Our conclusion really is that as a country we have seen the challenges that we have faced when it came to having the first debt relief in 1995 and 1996. We were able to get that because we fought to ensure that as a country would keep our banner high and be able to account properly and show that we are focusing in the right social sectors. Currently, what it was, it had changed, but we can come back onto the same. We can come back to the same road and say we are going to do better as a country. We owe it not to our government but to our people, because it's them that have been paying the taxes, it's them that have been ensuring that at least whatever money that they were able to receive, they were able to pay. So why don't we come back and say, here is the road that you've been waiting for, here is the services that you've been complaining about, now have been, you're now getting them, when it comes to health, education. So mainly as Uganda Debt Network, we are really for the campaign of debt cancellation, not on the negative of how it has been before, but now looking at what better way can we look at it now? What way are we going to be able to come back and say as a country, given the time that we will be given to go ahead with a proper way of handling resources, which we won't be having it as a cycle for debt cancellations, but instead as a way to put us back on the right track and to look at proper utilization and proper service delivery for our people.
All right, thank you so much, Penny and Babas, for drawing insight into that. Now, you must note that this comes at a time when there's a lot of business disruption, and of course now statistics are showing us that, or they are predicting that over 2.6 million Ugandans are likely to drop down the poverty line. That is by December this particular year, and that is driven by a lot of factors. COVID-19 disrupting economic activity. A lot of people are not able to earn the household income that was coming in previously, and even government is not bent towards doing much, at least because of course of less resources. A lot of money is going to the debt, disbanding of the debt or servicing them, and even looking at the different buying probably testing kits and meeting their available needs in terms of social services. So it is really not making as much sense for us to continue spending as much money, paying off the loan in interest and all that to the IMF, World Bank, G20 and the like, yet we have a lot of problems, a lot of priorities, a lot of burning issues here locally. That is a recommendation from the Uganda Debt Network. We'll take a quick break and we do return with other discussions of the day. Do stay with us.